This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is Vanessa Marshall, Harrison Dula from Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Joining us today for a cup of coffee to talk about the 10th episode in Season 2 of The Bad Batch. The episode is titled Retrieval. We have got two guests chatting with all of us to discuss this incredible, well, I don't know if incredible is quite the word, but we do have a lot to say about the episode. First, we're going to bring in Mason Z. Mason Zehr, how are you, buddy?
Good. I just got my Super Bowl t-shirt in the mail today of the Chiefs.
So life is good. I said, you don't know how lucky you are just to be not only to get that shirt, but man, what I wouldn't give to have a Chicago Bears shirt that said Super Bowl champs. That wasn't from full of moths. Yeah. All right. Well, this guy is not full of moths. He's full of energy and insights. You know him from the Rebel Base Card podcast. This is Greg McLaughlin. Greg, welcome back to the show.
Dan and Mason, it is so nice to be on with you both tonight. Nice to see you again on this, I guess we're celebrating Ash Wednesday. So good on everybody.
Yes, indeed we are. Well, let's just jump right into it. Mason, we'll start with you. Give me a one word to describe the episode and overall thoughts on it.
Greed.
Read. Seems apt. Tell me why you picked that one. Or no, actually don't tell me that. Tell me your overall thoughts on the episode.
One word. Mako.
All right. What a deliciously ambiguous start to this. Greg, what about you? One word to describe the episode and overall thoughts.
Boy, I would say the word I would say is inevitable, because I think we are moving the Bad Batch, albeit a little slowly, to a conclusion. I think we know what's going to happen with them. But I would say I was very satisfied with the episode. And then the second one, you know, a lot of times when you're watching and you happen to watch on your mobile phone, I think you miss a lot. And so when you get a chance to see it again on the big screen and you're catching not only the music, the video, but a couple subtle things I missed the first time through is so much better. So second time, even better than the first.
Right on. I would agree with that. My word is infuriating. I cannot stand Mako. He is so, like, there are times I even can't watch him. That sequence where he's eating. Oh, he just drives me crazy. The episode overall, I think I kind of see it as two parts. I think the first half is really just kind of a setup. The second half is the payoff. And when they actually get the Bad Batch arrives and meets Benny, and it has a very different tone than the opening sequence. So we're going to talk a lot about it. I found the episode to be frustrating, but purposefully frustrating. And I think that is good storytelling. So let's kick it off with you, Greg. What are some, as you know, we don't really go through this one linearly.
I would say, and I was going to be very interested in Mason's reactions to what I thought was a huge Peter Pan, Captain Hook, Lost Boys vibe. I mean, I think we've seen some of those Disney, you know, some of the Disney, some of the Indiana Jones, you know, kicks this one, but you know, something kept bugging me with Maka the whole time. And I think at the end, you know, when you see sort of, you know, when you see the revolt, as it were, that's when I saw the payoff, and I saw Captain Hook in Maka right there. So that's just, you know, what I thought was kind of interesting. But you know, we come of it from maybe seeing, you know, Peter Pan, seeing Hook, but I was kind of curious. I didn't know if Mason had seen either of those two movies. I mean, they're not, you know, they're not young anymore. But I was just kind of curious if he didn't, what kind of perspective he came from picking this up, and what did you think if you got some of the same?
Mace?
I think Benny admires Omega.
Yes, I think Benny admires Omega a lot too. Do you agree with Greg that there's kind of a Peter Pan and Captain Hook thing going on here?
Yes.
Because when you were a kid, you loved Peter Pan. Loved it. You're still a kid, but a much younger version of yourself. Talk about the Peter Pan and Hook comparisons that Greg brought up.
It was like Mako falling, but then Benny tries to help him up. But then Mako says, "Don't cross me again, boy."
And that reminds you of Captain Hook.
Pull him down.
Well, you've even got the hand thing, right? That Mako's got that hand, which is, of course, like his own little version of a hook, clearly. And there is a vibe, too, of, well, whereas Hook is clearly out for himself, and then they're just kind of scared of it. They're just, pirates that don't seem to have any loyalties either way. Mako, it reminded me more of Charles Dickens or like Oliver Twist or something like that. Very Dickinsonian, or like in The Force Awakens with Rey and Unkar Plutt. But I think that Mako is much, much worse because of, while there's a bit of a rivalry there, it's more about him controlling people through fear, through intimidation, and through this false pretense of superiority. But Greg, I want to hear what you think about the Captain Hook thing.
It was interesting when I first saw Maka, and I saw that, he had the mechanical hand, but also he kind of walked with a limp. He was kind of walking with the cane and had the droids. But, when I first saw, like his crew, which were mostly boys, and how he was really, first off, he was not crazy at all about having the ship. He's like, this is going to bring attention that I don't want. We're going to have to get rid of it quietly. And then, when you see him like gorging, it wasn't eating, it was gorging.
Yes.
And I kind of saw that he seemed very, he was worried about like his control over, he was very concerned with keeping that and very, rationing out the food and so forth. And so, that kind of started leading to me to believe that, he has a very precarious situation. It seems, inevitable to them, his crew, that, he's got this like, his thumb down on him, but it just seemed very fragile. And as it got closer, you're going, closer to the end, you're like, where's this going to go? But then, of course, Benny does, sort of reveal it and turn the tables on him. But it was fascinating to watch that. But I thought the payoff at the end was really nice. I mean, it was really good, and I liked how that resolution came. I mean, not too many shots were fired. I mean,
no,
except
none.
Maka getting losing his life, falling to his death. But other than that, it was pretty low body count.
I love the symbolism there of his artificial hand is what drops off, because he's an artificial person, and that very much leads to his downfall. I think it's even giving him more credit than he deserves. I don't think he thinks any further than that moment, because the way he eats shows you what kind of person that he is. Like you said, he's not eating, he's gorging. He's not even enjoying it. He's not even trying to be full. He's just having it because he can have it. It's like dragons in Dungeons and Dragons that just lay in gold. They're not going to spend it. They don't need it. They can have whatever they want, but they just want it because everybody else does it. And the way that when he feeds all of them, he says, well, I'm not going to let my people starve. He says, you're going to have to work a lot harder and longer for rations. So he gives them this little bowl of soup that they all have to take a spoon and just get. I mean, that's not enough to live on. And that just shows how foolish he is. He doesn't see that the Marauder could bring him a ridiculous amount of riches. And he even knows that it's modified. So it's got to be some extra surplus there. And the fact that he doesn't see, if I don't feed these people, they will get weak. They won't be able to work. I won't be able to mine this MCM that I keep telling them is degraded, but it isn't. He just, not only is he greedy and slovenly, but he's an absolute fool. And I think that's what rankles me so much more. I don't like when people take advantage of people in a fictional world or not, and he really gets my goat. Mason, what would you like to bring up about this episode?
Benny turning on Omega, but then thinking about it as they're coming. Well, you think they're coming after he presses the button.
So here's a question. So that in that sequence, they're working together. He very much, like you said, he looks up to Omega, and I think that's right. Was there moments where you saw them interacting where you first thought, oh, he totally looks up to her?
I think in the very end, like the very last scene.
Oh, right. When he realizes that he's basically free and he's got like a family. Okay, that's fair. Do you think he would have changed his mind if she didn't provide that evidence for him that Mago has actually got a whole bunch of money and he's just taking advantage of everybody? Do you think he still would have changed his mind?
No.
I'm not sure either. Greg, what do you think? I mean, the emotional aspect, he keeps saying, I've got a, it's like, it's a classic I can't think of the word. What is the word? But it's definitely an unhealthy, toxic relationship. It's an abusive relationship. I think maybe that's the word I was looking for. Where he keeps saying, no, I can show him, I can get him to care about me. I really want and I need his approval. And all he is doing is sucking them dry with the way he takes advantage of them and their labor and their affections for him, when really he just wants to use them to his heart's content. He treats them like they're less than individuals. So I don't think, even though he really does appreciate Omega, I think that grip and that toxic thing is buried so deeply in all their psyches that if not for hard, cold evidence, facts, I don't know that he would have turned.
I'll only add this as maybe a slight pushback, but because of what you said, he has that relationship, right? He's got that on that, and everybody is just so wired for that when Omega just hands over her rations to him, I think that act really was a tipping point. I don't think you can have that turn. The evidence, I do think, is clear. But I do think that just, because you see it in the beginning when he sees the rations, he's going to eat that ration that's on the floor of the Marauder. And that payback, the payoff later when Omega just freely gives it to her. And he's also seen her do, she's been kind of feeding this whole time, that I think that act really does kind of is a tipping point.
I love that. And I didn't think about that. And of course, the act of sharing food and sharing a meal together is such an intimate, important act, a sign of love. And he never offers food to them, or they have to fight for it, where she just like, oh, here, you can have mine. And he just is eating it. He doesn't gorge it either, by the way. He just eats it. He savors it. And he's just sort of thrown by the whole thing. So, I think I'm persuaded. I like that. I want it to be wrong. And so I'm very grateful for that perspective. The main thing I want to bring up, besides how much I can't stand Mako, which I think I've made very clear, is I just like, first of all, this is not super important, but when they're playing that little game that looks like dominoes, it's like some sort of a space/Sabaki version of dominoes. I thought of you, Greg, and I thought of Tom Gross, because I thought, oh, this is something they're going to absolutely love. There are little other developments too. Wrecker continues to be afraid of heights, but I mean, by this point, is he afraid of heights? I mean, I take insult as a person who's deathly afraid of heights. I couldn't go any of those places that he could go, and he just kind of groans, but he is fighting, absolutely fighting through it. There is a great action sequence when they ambushed Benny. I know, Mason, you really liked that part too. I thought that was super cool. You want to talk about that, Mace?
There's another part I think worth talking about.
Okay, go ahead.
It's when Drake helps Benny at the end when Mako's trying to pull him. Because when, like you said, when they're playing that space dominoes thing, they don't even really talk to each other except, I think I'm going to win. No, I am.
Mm-hmm. And then they team up because they realize that why are we fighting against each other, which is a really, really nice thing. Besides that ambush, I think the scene where Hunter descends down into that tunnel, tube, exhaust, whatever. My Star Wars plumbing is a little rusty. They have a minute, and I didn't time it out. Mason, you're usually pretty good about timing stuff like that out. It probably was about a minute or so.
It wasn't a minute. I know that. It was like 25 seconds.
Well, okay. Well, either way, we can prove that one later. But I think that's an excellent sequence. And I think it's nice to see Hunter in action because we don't really see a ton of that recently. So for me, just as a fan of Star Wars in action, I really enjoyed that moment. That was one of my favorite scenes. Any other sequences we want to talk about? I don't feel like there's a ton to pour over in this one, honestly, because I think the important thing to note is, again, the effect that Omega has just by being herself. She's never preachy. She's never judgmental. She has her family. She knows what she needs to do. She and Hunter work so well together. He seems to be far, far removed from angsting over her. He trusts her like a fellow member of Clone Force 99. And I think that's really, really nice to see. And I like the idea of, well, at one point, Tech points out, Mago uses power and means to gain leverage. similar to the Empire, but on a much smaller scale. And then they have this moment where Omega is very concerned. There's so many people besides the Empire that are nasty. And then, amazingly, Tech says, yeah, but there are a lot of people like us too. Tech being the pathos. Love that.
I'm so happy you brought that up, because I went back through and I was writing that quote down. And, something, once again, going back to that, not seeing that on a big screen, he flashes that little grin at the end. And that was such a payoff for that last episode where they have that moment together. And, even, tying back Hunter's relationship with Omega, Wrecker's kind of still moaning a bit about heights, but kind of getting over it. You're seeing this little growth. And, unfortunately, like I said, a lot of times we have to, we're slipping in this, viewing, during lunch or something, we're taking our mobile phone and we're really missing out on a lot of these little moments that, as we're seeing the pacing of this entire season, we're missing it. And so, it's great that these episodes are short. They are fairly, straightforward, but there's these little bits they're putting in, going back and listening to, Kiner's music, especially at the end as Omega's kind of being saved by Hunter, and, that trust that they had, she knew exactly what he was going to do. And, it doesn't seem now that a lot of those things you're not unexpecting. They're just working together. It's just the engine's just going like it's getting greased really well. And, although it could seem like it's moving slow, it's just really nice to kind of see this. And, I was also just happy Benny's chase at the beginning was short, because I was like, at this point, like, all right, that's sort of like my reward for, like, I understand what you're going to do, but it's nice that I don't necessarily need this to go on for many minutes.
Agreed. I also felt chase fatigue, so I was glad not to have to see that as well.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Oh gosh, Mason, anything you want to add that are on your notes that we haven't talked about yet?
Nothing.
Not at all. Greg, what about you?
We kind of mentioned this a little bit, but I did like Tech's appraisal of the workers' condition, and I think that's something else kind of leading back into that they are noticing that that people are being oppressed across the galaxy. And I think these lines are really nice because they're just adding up. And the only other thing I would say, as much as you hate Mako, Jonathan, I think is it Lapau or Lapo, who did the voice for it, I had to read, was also the voice of Gunji. So if we wanted to kind of, a little bit of sugar with the urine, as it will, for lack of a better one, I would say that you could take away that he was also a voice of a character that we loved seeing. So,
yes, I mean,
one redeeming feature, shares a common voice.
Amen. Well, I mean, this is all the performance is great, and that's one of the reasons why it's so impactful. And he's obviously supposed to be a really nasty character, and mission accomplished. The only thing we didn't really talk about is, yes, Kiner's music. A special shout out to my CWK Live friends who join us every week, because they've been talking about Kiner's music every time we do our top fives, and this is no exception. It's really noticeable on that bridge that very much reads like the Temple of Doom bridge. And even some of the music as they're slowly marching across. We've seen a lot of Indiana Jones homages in season 2 of The Bad Batch, and I am absolutely here for something like that. So I guess let's give our letter grades, and if you want to explain them, go ahead, Mason. The floor is yours.
Fractions, A and 5/10.
An A and 5/10.
Or A and 1/2.
Okay, an A and a half. You're killing me with these crazy equations. Tell me why.
Fractions, because of math.
Yes.
And I mean, it wasn't the Super Bowl, like I said last week, but I liked the episode overall.
Okay, so is an A and a half, is that like an A++, or is it just under an A+?
It's under an A+. It's halfway to an A+.
Okay,
From an A.
That helps my English teacher brain make sense of that. Thank you. Greg, what about you?
Well, for one, just as an aside, before we, as we're kind of winding things down. I did want to say I'm going to give Mason an A, because I would say that, listening to you over this season, as we have, we got to see you at Steam and the Star Wars Live, doing it. And then from now, it's really fun to watch you grow as a podcaster. And I think Dan needs to put you to use more often, especially with a lot of shows coming up. So I would just say I love coming back week after week, and I love the theme of these shows. You're bringing in a lot of different folks, and some family folks as well. It was just kind of fun because I think it matches this relationship with the Bad Batch so well. So there's going to be my grade for Mason. As far as the grade for the show, I was going with a solid B, but I would say on that second viewing, seeing Tech and Omega again, I'm going to give it my B plus. That plus is specifically for a little bit of a grin, just because if you love Tech, and I know our mutual friend Frank Mulder is a huge Tech fan. Shout out. You've had a multitude of plenty this season with Tech. So I would just say that alone, I think these little bits and bobs that they've added to it, B plus in my book.
Very good. And thank you for your awesome words about Mace. That is very good. And now I'll always remember this episode as the one where Mason hired Greg as his agent. And it's a very, very good choice. Choice.
Call me.
I would give this episode, I'm going to split it up on my rubric. I think the first half of the episode is a B minus. The second half of the episode is an A minus. So I'm going to combine them to a nice solid B. A nice solid B. It has some great character stuff. As you said, we get to continue to enjoy the feast that is Tech in very nice, organic ways. Nothing seems forced. And I really like the messages that are present. And I always like redemption, especially in a good Star Wars thing. And seeing Benny start to realize that he has worth outside of what someone gives him. And once he realizes that he's being taken advantage of and used, he doesn't feel down on himself. He empowers himself. And that is something that he is sorely needed. So I really, really like that message quite a bit.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is... yes.
All right. Well, thank you both, of course, for joining me on Coffee with Kenobi this week to talk about Retrieval. Looking forward to sharing all of your top fives next Tuesday night at 7 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. In the meantime, you can find Mason cruising through the stars with Patrick Mahomes. Looking forward to the next NFL season. Is that right, Mace? Oh, look at
that Chiefs gear. Nice.
That's right. And Greg, please let everybody know what's going on with Throw Base Card and what you've got going on.
Well, thank you. It's been fun going over the Bad Batch with my partner in crime, Greg Cass from Ion Cannon. We had Jen Subchakchai, who did all those Willow episodes with you. They were both in town last week. It was really fun to do the show in person. But we're going to finish out and somehow had to figure out how to squeeze in the Mandalorian as well, although that it's going to keep me up nights. On the card side, I think we got some nice shows coming up. Be talking to some other card folks, Ian Taylor from the Marvel Card Collectors podcast, as well as hopefully getting Mark Newbolt on. Cross your fingers. And one of the reasons I wasn't in the CWK live chat was John and Mary Jo Tenuto was doing a really interesting library presentation on Star Wars in print, and they have a book coming out this summer that's going to talk about the radio dramas, the Star Wars radio dramas of the original trilogy. And I am this close, I think, of getting them on. And I know they're making the podcast rounds, but I'm real excited about that and some of these shows. And it's going to be fun. I mean, it's a lot of work. You know this all too well. We all kind of keep an eye on what you're doing and how you're staying on top of things. But it's fun, having a great time.
Well, I'd love to hear it, and again, love hearing you and Greg, and when Jen is onto it's just magic. You're three wonderful members of the community, and I can't thank you enough for not only being on the show and supporting you, but being so awesome to Mace too.
Mace is a baller, man. Do not take him lightly.
That's right. He will take your cards if you're not careful with those trades he used to do a couple summers ago. Well, thank you again, Greg and Mason. On behalf of myself, we will see you next week. Get your top 5 list ready to join me next Tuesday night. And remember, this is the podcast you're looking for.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here.